Welcome to the second episode of the tutorials on how to use the RODE database. In the first tutorial, we talked about the basics of ROCEEH, the project, also the basics of the database. We looked at the RODE Simple Search and also at the RODE data summary sheets. And if you need to go back and look at that, if you're just starting with this video, you might want to do that now. If not, then we'll move right on to Ask RODE, which is a way for you to compose a query to extract data from RODE. So before I get into the details, we need to understand a little bit about what's in RODE. We look at four main disciplines of science. One of them is paleoanthropology, looking at human remains, which species are present, where they're present, and when they're present. We also look at the different cultural remains, the archaeological materials, such as stone artifacts, bone tools, symbolic materials like shells or ochre, and many other finds that could be present at an archaeological site. We also look at the fauna that are present in the environment, because it's very important for understanding how people lived in the past, and equally important are the plants. So these four categories are present and can be queried to understand the environments of early humans, and also to understand their culture, and also to see which species are present where and when. The RODE database is structured around the site. We call it locality, but that's the main building block that everything is connected to. So once you have the name of your site, then you can start to build up the site with different geological layers. And the geological layers can have ages, and there can also be archaeological layers for archaeological sites. And these can have different cultures associated with them. And all of these can have different radiometric datings associated with them so that we can understand how old the sites are. Once we have that structure established, we can now start to add the finds, which we call assemblages, into the picture. And those are embedded into the different layers that are contained in the site. In this part, I'm going to introduce Ask RODE to you. Ask RODE is a simple tool that allows you to compose queries to extract data from the RODE database. In the past, we had several options that allowed users to take data and use it for other purposes, for analysis, for example, or for mapping, but these required a login. And with Ask RODE, we eliminated the need for logging in, and we also eliminated the need for understanding the database structure to the depth that was required to do the other methods. One of those methods was to filter a table, but that was focused on a single table and usually single attributes. And since most queries are more complex than that, where you have to bring multiple tables together, we had a query tool that we developed, which allowed a user to bring different tables together, to specify conditions, so that they could then run their queries. But again, this requires the users to be logged in. Another way was using a Sparkle endpoint that we've built in. Many of the database queries were in fact so complex that the query tool didn't allow users to be able to enable them. And so we worked with other researchers and helped them to formulate the queries, to compose the queries, and enable them to then extract the data without all of that information. So basically by meeting with me and with the programmer, Sarah Kanaeva, we could write queries that the user could then use through a simple API, which is basically a web address that allowed the user to enact the query and then to save the data in the file format that they wanted. We offered several different file formats. One of them literally allowed you to copy the screen and then to paste it into Excel. Others allowed you to save the text, the data as text. Another option was using XML, and finally JSON, both of which allow other databases and web functions to interact with the data that was extracted. The first thing I want to show you is just a brief overview of how Ask RODE functions. This is a workflow or a flow chart that guides you through the thought process that's involved. And It's relatively straightforward to use, but I think instead of talking too much about the workflow, I'm just going to show you how it works. When we're in the Road Simple Search, you'll see above the link to Ask Road, and you can click on it directly. You can also just type in the URL for Ask Road, which is shown here, and it gives you, again, a brief outline of the process, the 5 steps that we're going to undertake, and that I'm going to walk you through now. So in the very first step, we're on the locality level. It's step 1A, and in this step, you can select your continent. If you're interested in a certain region, you can select a sub-area of the continent, you can pick a country, and you can also select the type of sites you're interested in. You might just be interested in cave sites, or open-air sites, or rock shelters, but there's many other possibilities as well. After you've decided on which criteria you want, and if you don't want any criteria, you'll get all of the data in Road, you can pick Select. And when you click Select, you'll get a pop-up window that lists all of the sites that meet the criteria that you're interested in. If you leave your query open too much, if it's too broad, it will take longer for it to run, and as we move through this process, the queries will take increasingly a longer time. At any time, you can save the information in the formats that I've described to you before, as text, as CSV, comma-separated values, as XML, or as JSON. You can also name your file, so you know which data belongs to which query. The next step is to get a bibliography for the sites you've selected. You can see that you can click on the bibliography link, click Select, and you'll get, as a pop-up window, the sites and the publications that were used to collect the data. In the first step, in the example I'm showing you, we selected Africa. As an example, it helps to limit the number of responses you get, which quickens the response of the database. In the next step, the second step, we pick the assemblages that we want. And in this example I'm showing you, we're picking human remains and also archaeological finds, and we want the period between 40,000 and 130,000. And when you press Submit, of course, you get the results. In the third step, we can now refine the query even more. We can now pick details about the human remains. In the example here, I've selected genus is Homo. That helps to narrow the field and also is pertinent to the time frame that we're dealing with for hominin remains in Africa between 40,000 and 130,000 years ago. In addition, I'm also going to select certain attributes about the archaeological materials. In this case, I'm just going to pick the lithics, the stone artifacts, and I'm going to say that I want them to belong to the Middle Stone Age. This is perhaps a useful query to understand human behavior in Africa during the Middle Stone Age and to see which humans are present at that time. Of course, it's cumulative, so we're talking about Africa, we're talking about human remains, archaeological materials between 40,000 and 130,000 years ago. Now I have the opportunity to combine the data sets. And I have two choices there. I can merge the data sets to get one composite data set with both the human remains and the archaeological materials, or I can run an intersect. So I pick only the sites in the one category that I chose, in this case human remains, that are also in the other category, archaeology. But there are some limitations about the intersect that sometimes you don't get the results you expect. There's a further step that you can run in addition to refining the query along the various pathways that I've described to you in the procedure for using Ask Road. You can also decide yourself which attributes you want to show or not to show, depending on your needs. In the fifth step, which is again building on all the previous steps that we've conducted, we can now get even further details about the different aspects. So for the human remains, we can pick the skeletal elements. For the archaeological materials, we can pick what kind of tools are present. If we had selected plant remains or animal remains, we could also get more information about the different species that are present. So you can really refine your query to meet your specifications depending on what your interest is. So, of course, now I'd suggest that you go and play with Ask Road. You make your own queries. You see a little bit more how it functions, how it works, how you can get your data in the format that you want it. And with that, I close this section and invite you to join me on the third installment of this series, which is going to be about registering to use Road if you want to get a password and login, as well as a tour of some of the user functions that are available to you when you've logged in.